The preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
The 92nd Street Y, you know, it's an outstanding institution of its kind. The Workmen Circle, how's that? Okay. The Workmen Circle is a fraternal order, 71 years old, which is engaged in perpetuating Yiddish language and Jewish culture. We have schools for children. We conduct series such as this. We sponsor the Folksbiene Theater, which incidentally, this season, is playing My Father's Courtroom, which was adapted from a series of stories by the author whom you've all come to hear. This is part of a series. It's the third part. We've already had afternoons with Joseph Buloff, famous Jewish actor, and with Shalom Secunda, a composer and conductor of many, many important songs. Yet to come is an afternoon with Tully Filmus on December 12th at 2 p.m., and this will be a discussion of Jewish art. And on January 23rd at 2 p.m., Lazar Weiner, the famous Jewish composer and pianist, will celebrate his 50th anniversary in the field of Jewish music. Tickets for these affairs are available at the box office in the Y. And now, to speak about the gentleman whom you've all come to hear. Isaac Bashevis Singer is probably the most prominent Yiddish writer living today. He was born in Poland, spent his youth in Warsaw, came to the U.S. before World War II, and followed in the footsteps of an older brother who was a very fine Yiddish writer, I.J. Singer. And I.B. Singer has now achieved great prominence not only in Yiddish literature, but in American literature and in world literature. His novels, The Family Muscat, The Manor, The Slave, The Magician of Lublin, have met with critical acclaim. His short story collections, Short Friday, The Spinoza of Market Street, have really drawn Jewish life closer to the American reading public. He is a very interesting speaker, and he will tell you all about himself, his approach to writing, and the materials that he uses. It is my pleasure to introduce a member of the National Institute of Arts and Letters, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, Isaac Bashevis Singer.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to read you a story. The title of the story is The Beard. Although it's in English, it is a Yiddish story, as you will see. It deals with Yiddish. That a Yiddish writer should become rich and in his old age to boot seemed unbelievable. But it happened to Chaim Pupka, a little man, sick, pockmarked, and with one blind eye and a game leg. While he struggled with his physical handicaps, the plays he could not finish, the poetry which no one read, and novels which no one was willing to publish, he followed a relative's advice and bought $1,000 worth of over-the-counter stock for $2 a share. He got the capital in the first place from generous patrons and benevolent societies. The stock went up to almost 100 times its original value in a matter of months. Later on, the same relative advised him to buy some half-ruined buildings on 3rd Avenue in New York. A construction company wanted the land and paid him an enormous sum for it. No one in the cafeteria, which we all frequented, ever learned the identity of the mysterious advice giver. But we knew that Chaim Pupko became richer from day to day. He himself admitted that he wasn't very far away from his first million. Nevertheless, he wore the same shabby clothes he always wore. He sat with us at the table, smoked cigarettes, coughed, ate rice pudding, and complained. What can I do with my money? Nothing. Give it to me, said Peltemanis, a writer of fables. What will you do with it? Take an egg cookie and a cup of coffee on my check. Chaim Pupko was the kind of primitive writer who could never learn how to construct a correct sentence. Had no notion of grammar, but was talented just the same. I often looked into his published works. They lacked any sense of organization. But on every page, I found some lines to surprise me. He described half-crazed people, chronic misers, old country quarrels, which had gone on for so many years that no one knew how they began or what they were about, and tragic love affairs, which started in the Polish villages and were carried over to the East Side tenement houses of New York and later to the hotels in Miami Beach. His paragraphs went on for pages. He would insert himself into the middle of his hero's dialogue. In the United States, Pupko learned about Freud for the first time, and he tried to explain his characters according to Freudian theory. He needed an editor, but he never allowed anyone even to correct his punctuation. Once, when I edited a small literary magazine, he brought me a story which began with the words, "The day was cloudy and the sky loyal." When I asked him what he meant by a loyal sky, his good eye looked at me with anger and suspicion, and he exclaimed, "Don't bother me with this intellectual nonsense. Either publish it or go to hell." He grabbed his manuscript and ran away. He had lived in America for 40 years and never learned more than a handful of English words. He never read anything besides his Yiddish newspapers. Psychology he pronounced piscology. Someone told me that a dictionary could be compiled of Pupko's errors. But sometimes he spoke like a sage. He lived somewhere in Bronzeville and had no children. A man told me that Chaim Pupko's wife had a thick beard, which used to be black but had since turned gray. He never took her anywhere. Nobody knew why she didn't shave off her beard. In my circle, I learned long ago never to look for explanations. A comedian of the Yiddish theater, who was known for his salty language, suddenly became religious, let his hidlocks grow, and settled down in Jerusalem in the quarter of the 100 Gates, where the most zealous Jews lived. An Orthodox rabbi divorced his wife, left the synagogue, and went over to the communists. 2 wives of rabbis in Brooklyn divorced their husbands and went to live together as lesbian lovers. Even Pupko's getting rich would not have surprised us too much, but he never let us forget about it. Every day he came and told us about his latest financial accomplishments. He began to advise us how to invest our savings. One day he boasted to us that the critic Gabriel Weitz was writing a book about him. This we could not believe. Weitz had written unfavorably about Pupka's work at every opportunity. He called him an ignoramus, village philosopher, and a contriver. We all asked, how is this possible? Chaim Pupka winked with his bad eye, smiled cunningly, and showed his crooked teeth. He said, when you grease the wheels, you ride well. Then he quoted a saying from the Talmud, money can purify a bastard. Pupka spoke to us openly. All these literary big shots can be bought for a pittance. He, Pupka, had talked business to Gabriel Weitz. How much would it cost, uncle? And the critic had given him a price, $5,000. We were all shocked. Gabriel Weitz never came to the cafeteria. He had a reputation of a serious writer. We had all decided that Chaim Pupka was bluffing. But then a magazine appeared with an essay by Gabriel Weitz about Pupka, which was announced as a fragment of a longer work. In it, Gabriel Weitz spoke of Chaim Pupka as a classic. He called him a genius. He was eloquent concerning Pupka's importance to Yiddish literature. Chaim Pupka did not lie. Gabriel Weitz had let himself be bought for $5,000. I said to Pupka, what do you gain by paying for such things? What is the value of such fame? And Pupka replied, you must buy everything. If you have a wife, you have to provide for her. If not, she will sue you. If you have a lover, you have to take her to a restaurant, pay for her hotel, and shower her with presents. Your own children would become your enemies if you stopped supporting them. Sooner or later, everybody sends you a bill. In that case, why should fame be different? He said to me, you too will praise me one day. These words made me shudder, and I replied, I have a high opinion of you, but there isn't enough money in the world to make me write about you. Don't say ah. He laughed and immediately became serious. Not even for $10,000, not even for $10 million. Someone at the table remarked, Chaim, you spoil your own business. He might have written about you sooner or later. Yes, it may be, I said, but now it's finished. Chaim Pupka nodded. Still, if you knew that writing a favorable review of me would keep you in comfort for the rest of your life, and you wouldn't have to scribble your articles, and could live somewhere in California, you would think twice. Why is it such a sin to say that I have talent? It's not a sin, and you have talent. But since you have begun to bribe critics, I wouldn't write about you for anything in the world. What if somebody would put a gun to your temple? Would you give in then? Yes, it certainly doesn't pay to die for something like this. I replied in our cafeteria style of conversation. Well, eat your rice pudding. I'm not giving you 10,000 yet. You will make it a lot cheaper. And he laughed, showing his teeth, crooked and black like rusted nails. A year passed, perhaps a little more or less. One day, I entered the cafeteria and sat down at our usual table. For a while, we chatted about a poem which a colleague had published in a magazine. One of us said it was a work of genius, and another that it contained nothing but empty phrases. For a while, we were engrossed in this controversial subject. Then the writer of fables asked, "Did you hear about Chaim Pupka?" What happened? He has cancer. So this is the end of all his fortunes, someone remarked. We ate our rice pudding, drank coffee, and the question of whether the poem was a work of genius or a worthless compilation lost its importance. One of us said, "We are disappearing and younger writers don't appear. 20 years from now, no one will know we ever existed." And if they do know, how will this help you? After a while, I went home to my bachelor quarters. My desk was cluttered with manuscripts, stories and novels which I never finished. Dust covered everything. I had a Negro woman who cleaned for me once a week, but I had forbidden her to touch my papers. Besides, she was old and half paralyzed. Often when she came, I paid her for the day and sent her home because I saw that she had no strength to work. I worried she might collapse while working in my apartment. This time I lay down on the sofa and read a letter. The date of it showed that I had received it 2 years earlier. I found it while rummaging in my inside breast pocket. The sender's address could no longer be read. Then someone knocked at my door. I opened it, and what I saw was like a nightmare. Outside stood a woman dressed in a shabby black dress, men's shoes and hat, with a white beard. She leaned on a cane. I knew at once who she was, Mrs. Pupka. I was afraid that my spying neighbor might see her and have something to laugh about. I said, "Come in, Mrs. Pupka." She looked at me with astonishment. Her cane passed the door first. She said with a mannish voice, "Your elevator doesn't function." I had to climb 5 flights of stairs. "I'm sorry, it's an old house. Sit down." "May I smoke?" "Yes, certainly." She took out a cigar and lit it. Perhaps it's a man, I thought. But I saw that she had a large bust. Most probably androgynous, I thought. She said, "My husband is very sick." "Yes, I heard. I'm sorry." "You are responsible for his illness," she said in a strong voice. Shaken, I asked her, What are you saying?" "I know what I'm saying. You told him some time ago that you wouldn't write about him for all the money in the world. For you, this was just talk to make yourself important. But there is a proverb, a blow is forgotten, but a word never. You hurt him with those words more than you can imagine. How did he deserve it? My husband has a great talent. Gabriel Weitz calls him a genius. Chaim has a high opinion of you. When you told him that you would never write about him, he took it very badly. You will never know how this affected him. He came home as yellow as wax. I asked him what was the matter, and in the beginning he didn't want to tell me, but I got it out of him. You won't believe me, but from that day on, he was never the same. Sick as he was always full of joy. He used to make plans for years in advance, but since that day, he never lifted a pen. He began to suffer from cramps in his arm. "Mrs. Pupka, this cannot be true," I interrupted her. "God knows that it is the truth. I'm not a critic. Gabriel Weitz is writing a whole book about him. He doesn't think much about Gabriel Weitz. We all know who he is, an intellectual bore. All brain, no feeling. He understands literature like my left foot. Don't think that one can fool Chaim. You are different. He reads every word you write. Sometimes we read you together. We are both insomniacs. We lie awake at night and whenever we talk about you, he says the same thing. He has talent. Then you had to strike such a blow. He's more sensitive than you imagine. Literature is his whole life. You don't know me, but I know you. Perhaps I know you better than you know yourself. I've been with Chaim for over 40 years. Do you realize what it is to share a life for 40 years? He reads me every line he writes. Whatever problem he has in his work, he asks for my advice. We have no children, but his works are our children. You never shared anything with anyone, so you don't understand such things. You write about love, but you don't know what it is. Forgive me, but you describe passion, not love, which makes sacrifices and grows with the years. In this respect, Chaim is 10 heads taller than you. Do you have an ashtray? I brought her an ashtray and she shook the cigar ash into it. She lifted her bushy brows and I saw dark eyes, almost all pupil. The witches who flew on brooms to attend black mass on Saturday nights must have looked like this. Why do you stare at me like this, like that? I'm a woman, not a man. May I ask you why? I know what you want to ask. I grew a beard when I was still a young girl. You may not believe me, but I was beautiful then. I tried to shave it or even to burn out the roots, but the more I tried, the quicker it grew. Don't think that I'm the only one. Thousands of women grow beards. A beard isn't only a man's privilege. When I met Chaim and he kissed my cheek, he exclaimed, "Bella, you are growing a beard," and he fell into a strange rapture. He was in love with my beard. Unbelievable. I didn't believe it myself, that this could be true. He spoke to me clearly. He was willing to marry me, but on one condition, that I let my beard grow. It wasn't easy to promise a thing like that. I said he was insane. He must have homosexual inclinations, I said. Oh, I knew you would say that. That is what everyone said. From you, I expected something more original. He's not a homosexual. People have idiosyncrasies which can't be explained by any theories. It wasn't a small matter for me to comply. It meant complete isolation. When my mother, peace be with her, came to visit me in Odessa after our marriage, and she saw me with a beard, she almost passed out. I became a complete hermit, but Chaim's wish was more important to me than any comforts. This is the kind of love which you cannot understand. Here in America, my isolation became even more complete. I could tell you a lot, but I didn't come here to explain my beard, but to warn you that you are killing Chaim. Please don't say such things. Chaim is my friend. In that case, you are killing your friend. We continued to talk for some time. I gave Mrs. Pupko my word that I would write about her husband. She said to me, "It may be too late to save him, but I want him to have the satisfaction of seeing something written about him by you." May I ask you why you smoke cigars? No, one mustn't know everything. In my mind, I prayed God that none of the neighbors would see her leave my rooms. But when I opened the door for Mrs. Pupko, I saw my neighbor, the divorcee, lurking in the hall. The elevator was still not working, and Mrs. Pupko had to walk down the stairs. She called out to me, "Be a gentleman and help me down." She grasped my arm, and her breast touched my elbow. For some reason, all the neighbors on all the floors had their doors open. As we descended, I heard children screaming, "Mama, see, a woman with a beard." A barking dog ran out of one apartment and caught Mrs. Pupko's dress in his teeth, and I barely succeeded in driving him away. That evening, I sat down to read Chaim Pupko's works again. A few weeks later, I had written an article about him, but the editor of the magazine to which I sent it delayed its publication so long that Chaim Pupko died in the meantime. He had just managed to read the proofs, and on the margin of the last page, he had written in a trembling hand, "Didn't I tell you?" Once, when I sat in the automat on 6th Avenue, not far from the public library, the door opened and Mrs. Pupko came in. She was supported by a cane and a crutch. Though a widow for 2 years, she still had her beard and wore a man's hat and shoes. She immediately limped over to my table and sat down as if she had an appointment with me. All the customers in the automat stared, winked at their neighbors, or laughed. I wanted to ask Mrs. Pupko why, since her husband was no longer alive, she had kept her beard. But I remembered her words, "No, one mustn't know everything." Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. Thank you kindly. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. What shall I do now?
Whatever you like.
Whatever I like. I made a speech in Tel Aviv about 2 months ago. I'm not sure, the speech may be too large. How much time do I have now? Half an hour? Maybe I will be able to read it. If not, I can stop in the middle. It's not really such a... The speech is called Literature and the Supernatural, but it could have a couple of other names. It's about many things. We are living in a time when artists are experiencing deep disappointment in themselves and in their muse. Science and technology are progressing in a fantastic way. Every day brings new triumphs. Flying to the moon is an unbelievable feat. How poor and retarded art appears in comparison with those achievements. The poetry of our time cannot measure up to the poetry of Homer, who lived 4,000 centuries ago. Not 4,000 centuries, 4,000 years in the name of God. The works of Cervantes and Rabelais are better than anything that is being produced in modern prose. The theater has become stagnant. In a sense, this is also true about philosophy and everything that is part of humanism. Since progress is the highest ideal of modern man, actually his God, the contemporary artist feels himself being cut off from God and his divine dynamic. He has no choice. He's compelled to repeat emotions and images which were already described thousands of years ago. A number of despairing artists try to find an outlet in pornography, but even here, there's nothing new to be said. Pornography is almost as old as the human species. Many writers feel guilty and humiliated by this state of things. True, there is an explanation. The human character, the human personality remain more or less the same. If an evolution takes place, it is a very slow one. But explanations don't make anyone happier. Many experiments have been made to avoid this dead end. Some tried to connect literature with exact science. One of the results is science fiction. In our time, Lord Snow attempted to make a blend of science and fiction. Other writers cling to Freud and his theories. For 50 years, the Russians have tried to link art to sociology. But in all these cases, the result is nil or almost nil. Two kinds of knowledge exist in men and in many living creatures. The first is the knowledge that comes from learning, studying, experimenting. Man is not born with a language. He has to learn it. Often he pays a high price for this education. To know that certain mushrooms are poisonous, men had to eat them and die. Intellectual knowledge is an idol demanding many efforts and countless sacrifices. But there is a kind of knowledge, I say knowledge in quotation marks, that does not demand any learning. The stomach does not need to study chemistry. Our eyes make good use of optic science. The semen cell of the male and the egg of the female do not need to study biology or embryology to form a new being. Spinoza expressed the idea that matter thinks. Von Hartmann believed that the unconscious is never mistaken. Many philosophers and thinkers maintained that behind the little ideas of the human brain, there is a notion of cosmic thought, of cosmic consciousness. The bird that flies 20,000 miles from the north to the south and finds in the jungle the nest which it abandoned last year is not in need of geography, photography, or a compass. This kind of knowledge has been called instinct, but no one knows what instinct is, just as we don't know what the genes that carry heredity are made of. In comparison with cosmic knowledge, our human knowledge is like a drop in the sea. However, this drop seems to grow, to become 2 drops, 10 drops, 100 drops, while the ocean of instinct appears to be static. It is easy for a tiny pond to fill up and overflow its banks, but the ocean seems to be always the same. It takes a long time to realize that the oceans are not as unchanging as we imagine. They do big things. They change continents. All the rushing little streams spill into them and are swallowed up. Art emerges directly from these oceans. Kittens and puppies are able to stand on their feet almost at birth. So art from the very beginning showed instinctive rightness. It was Freudian thousands of years before Freud. It touched on truths which psychologists and sociologists may discover a century from now. Modern science seems to have refuted, once and for all, the beliefs of the superstition of folklore. It is rare that someone today believes in demons, hobgoblins, imps, and other such spirits. But literature, even modern literature, still cannot rid itself of these entities. They pop up again and again. Emile Zola's attempt to create a rationalistic and scientific novel never succeeded. Literature still teems with the old beliefs, the ancient symbols, and the dreams of the mystics. The Soviet critics failed completely to make literature art of Marxism and Leninism. There is resistance in Russia and a longing to return to Gogolian mysticism. Yiddish literature existed for a time under the banner of the Enlightenment, the Eschole, but soon came such writers as Peretz, Nister, Anoichi, the Zeitlins, and younger ones. It is characteristic that in the literature for children of all nations in all languages, folklore is still blossoming. The child who is nearer the ocean of instinct than the adult knows that the spirits do exist, both good and evil, as well as sorcerers, witches, miracles, magic. Allow me to say a few words about my own experience. When I began to write, my colleagues and critics scolded me for dealing with topics which were both obsolete and refuted. My editor, Abraham Kahn, said to me, "Who nowadays cares about devils and dibbuks of 200 years ago? Who is going to be interested in reincarnation, revelations, corpses who rise from their graves, mocking spirits who whistle behind the ritual baths? The so-called progressive reviewers contended that what I wrote was opium to put the masses to sleep, so that they would forget their struggles for a better system. A number of Zionistic-minded critics complained, wouldn't it be better if you would describe the struggle of our pioneers in Palestine? A Jewish homeland is being built before your eyes, and you are caught up in spider webs. I myself thought that from a logical point of view, they were right. But a power stronger than logic attached me to what they called spider webs. I knew that the very fact that the Jewish homeland was coming to be after 2,000 years of exile has much to do with folklore, fantasy, and instinct. People with cold logic and facts call the Zionists dreamers, fantasts, mystics, and reactionaries who were trying to turn back the wheels of progress. Without the spiderwebs of instinct and folklore, there would never have been a Jewish state. Without faith in higher powers, in the hereafter, in special providence, not a trace of the Jewish people would have remained. The stories that idlers and old women told around the stove made it possible for us here to remain Jews and to identify with Jewish ideals. As I told you, ladies and gentlemen, I read this speech in Tel Aviv, so it makes sense to say all these things. I am not ashamed to admit that not only did I use Jewish folklore as a theme for my stories and novels, but I believed and still believe today that we are surrounded with the powers and beings of those stories told around the stoves. There isn't and there cannot be any love without telepathy, sparks of clairvoyance, premonitions. No human undertaking is purely scientific. Hitler and Stalin are for me not just evil people, but evil spirits, devils in the shapes of humans. The Holocaust in Europe and the emerging of the Jewish state are not isolated events, but they have a deep mystical connection in my mind. While I admire the babbling streams of logic and the waterfalls of intellect, I don't forget that they come from the mystical sea of instinct and return there. Science itself is becoming more and more mystical. The atom, which used to be the cornerstone of materialism, its strongest support, became a phantom in our time. It is no longer matter, but pure energy. Gravity today is as much a riddle as it was in the time of Newton. The electromagnetic waves are even greater mysteries today than they were in the time of Faraday and Maxwell. The universe, which goes on expanding and exploding like a cosmic bomb, can no more be understood through the theories of Kant and Laplace. A part of the old magic became science, and science itself becomes more and more magical. Every attempt to explain the history of the world, the history of men, through this or that theory, falls down with a bang. The Jewish history is the story of 1,000,001 nights. Modern science teaches us more and more how to use the powers of nature, just as a cook learns how to prepare meals from the meats, vegetables, and spices in his kitchen. But neither the cook nor the biologist can tell us what protoplasm really is, how it was formed, and how it reached its present state. We have learned to maneuver blindly with all kinds of material, but we still remain blind. If here and there we see a speck of light, it is only with our instincts. No, the sea has no reason to humble itself before the rivulets of the intellect. Under the ocean's surface run colossal streams, cold and hot. In its depths, fantastic forests grow. In its darkness live creatures that don't need any eyes because they see without them. How ridiculous it is to read that the rocks that are brought back from the moon will once for all make clear how the universe has arisen. I know deep in me that we will not become much wiser from the moon rocks than we did from the rocks of the earth. Such is the intellect, and there is a purpose even in this. that the slightest achievement, at the slightest achievement, it becomes megalomaniac and imagines that it has finally revealed the secret of creation. Some of us still remember the boasting of the scholars when they managed to produce uric acid in a laboratory. It was said then that men could at last manufacture life or life processes. Furthermore, just as the honey produced by a bee is as much part of nature as the bee itself, so are all human achievements just as much a part of nature as the people themselves. We are all bubbles of the cosmic sea and the cosmic thought as well. Even rationalism, human pride, and boasting are mysterious powers. In the Cheder, the teacher, the Melamed, used to scatter raisins over the alphabet that the child was to learn in order to make learning delicious. In the same way, fate scatters raisins of illusion and conceit on those who study the alphabet of nature. I will return now to literature, which is the subject of this speech. It is the misfortune of modern literature, all literature, with few exceptions, that it has forsaken the sea of instinct and has begun to draw from the little rivulets and ponds of intellect. Many factors contributed to this situation. The liquidation of illiteracy and the spread of education have produced multitudes of writers. Many of those writers are people without talent, which is the same as saying that they cannot draw from the wells of instinct. They can only use a secondary source. Literature has become a huge industry. The printing presses are waiting. New hordes of readers emerge daily, and there is neither time nor patience to wait for the emergence of talent. Most of these writers are semi-intellectuals, and they sincerely believe that literature is a profession and can be taught in courses, and that there exists a ready formula. The second cause is the envy of science and scientists. The progress of technology has confused many potential writers and made them decide that literature must follow the methods of technology. If social conditions change, literature must be the horse that pulls the social wagon, or at least pushes it. Both the communists and the fascists demanded that literature should serve them completely, become their slave. But not only the communists and the fascists, many moderate politicians have the same desire. If literature is an energy, it should be harnessed and used. The third cause is the diminished influence of religion. The epoch of the Enlightenment has never ended. The average reader is a rationalist. He has neither interest nor sympathy for folklore and mysticism. He would rather read literary puzzles and puns a la Joyce and Nabokov than a book which describes character and personality. He's eager to sharpen his wits and his reading. He also wants the writer to solve his social problems or to be his psychoanalyst. Modern man is so imbued with politics that he cannot forget it for a minute. After his daily newspaper and the many magazines he consumes, he reads books with political messages. When he goes to the theater, he again looks for politics. The pornography of our time is a desperate attempt to distract the reader from politics. But pornography itself is a literature without individuality. It describes sex in general, not specific cases. It tries to shock a reader who's already shock-proof. Instead of progressing, modern literature has fallen into a swamp where it can only sink and disappear. The first serious attempt to connect fiction and abstract ideas, to mix description and essay, was made by Thomas Mann in his Magic Mountain and later in his Joseph trilogy. In the 1920s, the Magic Mountain amazed the European intellectual with its ideas, its philosophical and psychological commentaries. Its protagonist, Hans Castorp, is not a man with individuality, but a means for the author to put across his ideas, to create an encyclopedic novel that teems with contemporary thought. Both Settembrini and Nafta endlessly discuss social and psychological problems that have really nothing to do with the action of the novel. It is characteristic of a book of this kind that it loses its national roots and becomes almost entirely cosmopolitan. Its setting is a sanatorium in Switzerland, where people from all over the world are gathered. Hans Castorp's mistress is a Russian. The whole atmosphere is pan-European and abstract. The fictional essay has done much damage to literature of our country, of our century, although Thomas Mann was naturally a great writer. It puts its emphasis not on storytelling, but on analysis. Analysis is what makes science progress, and the fiction writer of our era has been eager to use it. Mathematics uses symbols, and many modern writers have become pseudo-symbolists. I say pseudo because the real symbol is the outgrowth of the story, its climax. The genuine symbol is not planned, but is a result of the writer's creativity. The symbolism of modern literature tries to imitate the mathematical symbol. The heroes become parables in need of explanation. They are signs for values, standing for groups and periods. All over the world, a literature is emerging that has abandoned storytelling and the revealing of human character. It is no longer satisfied to tell the fate of an individual. Its subject matter becomes more and more collectives. It is abstract whether it preaches social reform or it is pornographic, whether it is sociological or psychological, whether it boasts literary erudition or is lying on the analyst's couch confessing aberrations and idiosyncrasies taken from psychiatric textbooks. One can understand that wars and revolutions should inspire works that describe mass movements and mass tragedies, but actually it is not in the power of literature to depict masses. From Tolstoy's War and Peace, only a few individual personalities remain with us. The marches of the armies, the plans of Napoleon and Kutuzov, the debates on the agrarian question are a superfluous addition to this masterpiece. One sometimes has the feeling that modern literature has decided that a single person, a unique character, does not deserve our literary attention. Since we cannot learn from him, he can be ignored. The result is that modern literature is becoming more and more a branch of journalism, closely connected with the various isms of our time. To use a Yiddish expression, it dances at weddings at which it does not belong, or let's say it in Yiddish, es tanzt auf fremde Chassanes. Until now, I have been speaking about literature in general, but since I have the honor of addressing a Jewish audience here in Tel Aviv, I will try to apply. Tel Aviv is all over the world, by the way. I will try to apply what I have said to Jews and Jewish literature. Many of us have seen what happened to Yiddish literature when it harnessed itself to communism. Not only have the Yevseks destroyed one another spiritually as well as physically, but they managed to annihilate such talents as Bergelsson, Kulbach, and Nister. Communistic leaders and fellow travelers in Poland and in the United States have terrorized young talents into employing their energies for Stalin and company. We have seen how Moshe Nadia committed literary suicide. Here in Israel, there was never any serious attempt to coerce young writers. But here also, many were hypnotized by the false idea, a political idea, that we can ignore or forget 2,000 years of exile, an idea that has driven men into an artistic amnesia. A generation has arisen that did not know Joseph, did not know Jacob. A writer cannot describe people if he does not know the language and the behavior of their fathers and mothers, the way their grandfathers spoke, acted, thought, dreamed. The contempt for the diaspora, for the galut, the ignorance of Yiddish and everything connected with it has sterilized the young writer in Israel. Their heroes have no past. Their figures lack the third dimension. 2,000 years of diaspora is for them nothing but a misfortune to be forgotten and buried. The young Hebrew writer has divorced himself from Jewish folklore. He has tried to jump directly from biblical times to the present day, a jump which must break one's neck. Our rabbis, our spiritual leaders of every kind, our merchants, middlemen, workers, scholars, Kabbalists, Hasidim, our Zionist leaders and socialist propagandists, they all spoke Yiddish and breathed Yiddish. A writer who does not know about these Jews knows nothing about the land of Israel, even if he is an expert on its geography. A culture is being created in Israel, which is one big foreign translation, mostly a bad one. There is the danger that old Israel may become a permanent imitator of Europe and America, a people with a territorial address but without a spiritual one. I remember once hearing a leftist Zionist in Poland say, "In exile, the Gentiles don't allow us to become assimilated. In Palestine, we will be free to be like everyone else." There is a danger that this foolish hope may become our reality. Not only are all the pulp novels in all languages being translated into Hebrew, but life itself is in a danger of becoming a translation. We have become so eager to be like other nations that we cease being ourselves. The forgetting of the diaspora may lead to the worst catastrophe that the Jewish people have ever experienced. This is not only a literary tragedy. The literary tragedy is a symptom of a general spiritual tragedy. If the Jew should lose his individuality, he will be in an exile more terrible than all his former ones. For 2,000 years, the exiled Jew, with all his being, clutched at his individuality and his spiritual heritage. He showed a tenacity unique in human history. He accumulated a mysterious energy on the remnants of which we live today. One has to be utterly insensitive to be ashamed of such ancestors, their language, and what they created in it. This is already the last page, so we'll soon be finished. The young Jew in Israel is striving to be up to date, thoroughly informed in all the ways of the Gentile, but he remains a stranger to his own heritage. He tries to nourish himself on the leftovers of nations that are cultural paupers themselves, while he overlooks the colossal riches of his own inheritance. A large part of this wealth is to be found in Yiddish literature, the Yiddish press, the Yiddish folk tales, the Yiddish mores, and the memoirs of those who have gone through the greatest trials of our history. There cannot be a Hebrew literature that does not include the Yiddish ear. Bialik and Agnon both delved into the treasures of Yiddish. They actually wrote about the villages of Poland, Ukraine, and Galicia. We suffer here in Israel from many misunderstandings which our modern times have created in connection with the mission and methods of art. But in addition, we are cutting ourselves off from most of our spiritual wellsprings. It is never too late to turn back. What I say now applies not only to the Ashkenazic, but also to the Sephardic. True, they created fewer secular values than the Ashkenazic, but they too possess a tradition that should become the property of all Jews. Their heritage must become ours, and our heritage must be theirs. Great literature does not come from forgetting, but from remembering. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you kindly. Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, Mr. Singer is a courageous man, having made that speech in Tel Aviv. But he's even more courageous. He's graciously acquiesced to answering some questions from the audience. However, two caveats. One, unlike Mr. Singer's speech, a question cannot be called by anything else. It is a question. It is not an exposition. It's not polemic. It's not a discussion. It is a question. And the other caveat is, if any of you are wondering why this whole procedure was conducted in English, it was done in deference to those who cannot understand Yiddish well enough to appreciate the art and the point of view of Mr. Singer. So please don't ask why we don't speak Yiddish. Hagam wir kennen beide sehr gut reden Yiddish. And now, if you have a question, please stand up and speak loudly when I recognize you.
I will make them ask questions.
All right.
If you feel like asking a question, just lift up your hand and ask, speak loudly, make the question short, and I will give you an answer. If I don't know the answer to the question, I will answer another question, so don't worry.
All right, any questions? Yes, sir.
My suggestion is there is one way, yes. Oh, you want to repeat the question? Yes.
The question was whether Mr. Singer has any suggestions to make about Yiddish in Israel.
There are no miracles. A language one has to learn, one has to study. I think that the people in Israel must decide that Yiddish must be the second language. I don't say the first one, but at least the second. In other words, in all schools, the scholars, the students should learn Yiddish, because without it, they will skip 500 or 600 years of Jewish culture in Europe.
Yes, ma'am. The question was whether Mr. Singer was planning any more books along the lines of the Manor.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Manor has a second part called The Estate, so there is a continuation. And The Estate finishes the novel. Naturally, some writers write trilogies. I've decided that 2 large parts is enough for the reader's patience.
Was there a question down here? Yes, ma'am.
Is it possible to get a copy of this speech? I would like to share it with a lot of people who are in the
The lady would like to share the speech with other people. I have only one copy with me, but sooner or later it will be published, I hope, and then whoever will have the patience to read it, I will be happy to see him do it.
Yes, ma'am. The question was whether this story has been published.
I seldom read to an audience a published story. This is a new story. I will publish it in the near future, I hope, but meanwhile, it has never been published.
Yes, sir.
In Yiddish.
Mit dem größten Kavod und Vergnügen. Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. I understand the question.
Yeah, I will tell.
All right, the first question was, what's wrong with Peretz, Ash, and the other great writers of Yiddish literature? Schneer, yes. And the other question is, why does Mr. Singer always write negatively about the shtetl?
What is wrong about Peretz, Ash, and others is that we don't have writers like them today. This is wrong. I wish we would have many like them. Whoever said that something is wrong about them? As far as about the negative writing about the shtetl, some writers believed that the people of the shtetl were all saints, and they wrote in this way. I did not believe in it. I always felt that we had good people in the shtetl and bad people. And since I want to be just and true to life, I wrote about the people of the shtetl in the way all writers write about their own people. I have lived in the shtetl, and it would be very false and ridiculous to make all people in the shtetl saints. They were not saints, and nobody would even believe us, even if I would try to write like this, that there is any truth in it.
The lady
Enough.
in the middle.
In the middle.
All right.
The lady wants to know what was the reaction to my speech in Israel. I will tell you. Most of the people who came to listen to me were Yiddishists, and they were delighted.
You know?
No, you can make two more.
Any more? How large was the audience?
I would say for Israel it was a large audience. It was full. The hall was full, and many people waited downstairs, and they heard me through a microphone. I had a large audience. There are many Yiddishists in Israel, and many people who are not Yiddishists, but they just speak Yiddish.
Yes, sir?
But do you think that modern writers of today should concern themselves with problems that are current also and be able to describe them rather than always go back to the historic aspect?
I don't mind if a modern writer writes about modern problems. There's nothing wrong in it. But he should not approach a novel or a story as if something which is to solve a problem. In other words, if you write about reality, you touch all the problems of the time. But the writer who is writing a story with the idea of teaching and solving problems is cynic against literature. He will never write a masterpiece.
You had a question? Yes.
Yes, do you think that what you have to say about writers in Israel is as true of American Jewish writers?
Well, I will tell you that the difference. So I cannot complain why Mr. Malamud or Saul Bella or Philip Roth don't know Yiddish, because they were not taught Yiddish. But the writers in Israel, many of them were taught Yiddish, but they ignore it. And many of them could learn Yiddish, because knowing Hebrew, when you know Hebrew, you know already half of Yiddish, because Yiddish contains many Hebrew words. Also, these people in Israel pretend to be nationalists. They pretend that they want to continue with their Jewishness, while these people here in America, they are not really Jewish writers. They are American writers who happen to be Jewish. In other words, I could not complain about them the way I complain about the writers in Israel, whom I consider of my own kind. You always complain in your own family. You don't complain about other families.
All right, we have time for two more questions. Yes, sir.
The gentleman wants to know if I wrote the story in English. No, I wrote it in Yiddish, and I translated it together with a collaborator. This is what I do lately. I write everything in Yiddish. I believe that a writer should write in his mother language, and my mother language is Yiddish. Not only do I think in Yiddish, but I dream in Yiddish. I know it because when I wake up at night, I begin to speak Yiddish to my wife, who doesn't know it too well because she was born in Germany. And from this I know that my dreams are in Yiddish.
Yes, sir.
The gentleman asked me where he can find my books in Yiddish. There is an organization here called Tziko. This is, you spell it C-Y-C-O. It's, if I'm not mistaken, 25 East 78th Street, and there they sell my books and other books in Yiddish. You can find the Sicker in the telephone book, and the telephone I don't remember.
This concludes the question and answer period. I want to thank Mr. Singer very much for an enlightening lecture, and wish you all good night. Come back again.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.